He is an assistant professor of library and information science at Governor State University in Illinois. He has academic background and research interests in language and linguistics and onomastics, software engineering, computer science, and library and information science. So today he is going to be talking about the semantics and politics of place names in the western regions of Côte d'Ivoire.
It's a pleasure to reunite with the group. I thought we would be able to meet in Denver, but this is okay. So I'm going to talk about the semantics and the politics of place names in the western regions of Côte d'Ivoire. I have a map of the African continent there, particularly the west part, and you see where Côte d'Ivoire is. Côte d'Ivoire is the official name, but the translation is widely used in different languages. So here in this country, they will refer to that as the Ivory Coast. Okay, so to provide some background information, I will briefly talk about the different ethnic groups and territories. That is very relevant for what I'm going to talk about. And then you need to factor in French colonization from the end of the 19th century till the 1960, when the country became independent. And I will talk about place names native place names in the Western region. At some point, you will understand the difference between native and non-native in this context. I want to talk about the morphosyntax of the names, and then the most interesting part of the presentation will be the discussion of the different political aspects of this situation. So you have here the map of the Ivory Coast as established by the Ethnologue publication. So the part of that I called Western region here is this part here and this other part. So this area is the area of ethnic groups called Kru ethnic groups, and then this part and this other part are the land and the territories of an ethnic group called Southern Mande. So I will be talking about place name in this area. It is particularly different from what is going on in other parts of the country because these territories represent lands of migration in the recent years of the history of the country. So when I come here, as you can see, you have the Akan group. It's the southeast part of the Ivory Coast. The largest ethnic group there is the Bakwé, and you have Agni, Abron, Zima, and all of that. And then you have the Kru. The Kru is the region that I'm talking about, the southwest. You have the Bété, the Dida, the Bakwé, the Wé, and others. And then in the north, in the northeast, you have the Gouro, the land of the Senufo, the Lobi, and the Kulango, and in this the Southern Mande are in the northwest, but part of them are very close to the southwest area that I will be talking about. So the historical background is that in pre-colonial Ivory Coast, it's not even relevant to say pre-colonial Ivory Coast because pre-colonial, the Ivory Coast did not exist. Only these different territories and ethnic groups existed on their land. And in that context, they were in charge of everything, the politics, the language policies, and everything on the land. Now, during colonial time, the French designed the boundaries of the Ivory Coast and brought together different people, different tribes that traditionally did not consider themselves as belonging to the same country. And at that point, they were designing national politics, which sometimes can be in contradiction with local interest. And after the colonial experience, when the country gained independence for the sake of national development, the government increased migration of population from the center, the east, and the north of the Ivory Coast into the western regions, which at that time were scarcely populated. And for the cocoa and coffee production economy, they needed labor in that area. This is a movement that started a little bit during the colonial time, but it became more of a pressing national interest after independence, when the Ivory Coast was struggling to become a major agricultural country. And that policy resulted in making the Ivory Coast, even up to today, the first cocoa producer in the world, and one of the major coffee producers. So there is migration, internal migration from the center of the country, the east and the north, into the western region. And then there's also Western African migration that started with the French during the colonial time. They used to bring in a lot of population from Burkina Faso and Mali to work in cocoa plantation, not in the southern part of the Ivory Coast, particularly in the western region. So the result is that Western Ivory Coast is no longer the land of the Kru and the Southern Mande. Western Ivory Coast is the land of everybody. Now, for you to have an idea, is that the Kru represent kind of minority ethnic groups within the Ivory Coast. The account that I talked about with the Bakwé group represent about half of the total population of the country, and the Kru region represent about 11% of the population. So with as a result of internal migration, it's like Bakwé have kind of outnumbered the Kru on their own territory. So that is, it has an impact on place namings. And I will explain that. So typically in all parts of the Ivory Coast, names, there are different criteria used for names. Typically, a village name will be related to a person. Like you have there, Kwasi Kro means literally the village of Kwasi. That's in the Bakwé language of the center. And Okabo means literally mountain under. That is a village under the mountain. And you have Bodanu, which means big forest in the big forest, a village that is in the big forest. Now, the languages of the Western region, largely the Kru territory, are in their language. The names of the villages are in their language and the different dialects. So in each area, in each region, in each county there, the names are local. And part of that territory, I said the northern part of that western region is Kru, the southern part is Kru territory, and the northern part is Southern Mande territory. The names in that area, just like in all other parts of the country, are in the local dialect. That was the way it was before the colonial time, and that was the way it stayed for a little while until that mass migration started in the late 60s and the early 70s. That's the time the government developed a national project, big national project, opening roads and big plantations for cocoa and coffee production. So you see there in the Subre region, in the western region, which is the Bété language, the name that I have there, like Kuduyo, Baleyo, Gedeyo, means literally village of Kudu, village of Bale, village of Gede, which are local names. And then in another region in the same area, you have Meagi, Ogreagi, Negreagi, Korigi, which means village of, relate to a person's name. You go to the Bakwé region, this is not the Bété group, this is here is the Wek Gere group. So you have Kahabli, Niambli, Baubli, meaning literally village of, and the name of the person. You go to another region in the on that western side, you have Manufla, Bitenfla, Gwenufla, Binufla, which means village of, and the names are local to the county of Sefra. So at this point, before the colonial time and the national politics that moved a lot of population in that area, everything was local and everything was okay until the mass migration. Because during the colonial time, the migration was not massive enough for the immigrant to create their own villages. Now, after the government programs of the late 60s and early 70s that moved in large number of population, things changed. Now, in the Central region, which is a Gouro region that I presented recently with the name ending with Fla, you have a lot, you have all of these villages right now, which are, okay, Kwajo Bakro, Yao Kro, Kuna Kro, Kwame Kro. Here, the names are no longer local. The personal names are names of the central region of the Ivory Coast, that is Baule land. And it happened that during these policies, national policies of moving population into the West, the president of that time was from the central region of the Ivory Coast. So it is largely believed that he helped large number of population in the center move to fertile farming lands in the West. As a result, a lot of, when they moved in, they created their own villages, small farming sites that became big villages. And at this point, because of the population difference that I explained, like 1 to 4 between the Baule and the Kru, at this point, the Baule villages in terms of population have kind of taken over the local Kru villages. The problem here is the local population kind of see that as a kind of invasion, a kind of occupation. And you take the Subre region. In this case, I'm giving only the example of one ethnic group. You see the name Asekro, Yobuikankro, Walebo. These are names of the Baule region. I can give similar names from another part of the country, like northern names, where the Madengo people, the Jula people moved in the West when they created village with their own name. The names are related to a person, or sometimes they are the name of a town in their own area. Like you see here, Walebo. Walebo is a county in Baule land, in the central part of the country. Now, that name is the name of a village right now in the West. And it's very funny that you see here, Petit Odiene. Odiene is a large city in the north, in Jula land. Now, a village in the western part of the country is called Petit Odiene. Now you see here, Zumana Kro. Zumana is typically a name from Burkina Faso. And the funny thing here is they are using the name of the person, but they are using the suffix here, Kro, is the suffix of Central Ivory Coast in the Baule language that is being used to name a village in the Western region. So here, the village is in the Western region. The name is the name of a person from Burkina Faso, but the suffix of the name is from the central part of the Ivory Coast in Baule land, as opposed to the Kru land of Western Ivory Coast. Now you see here Keita Dugu. Keita is a name from Northern Ivory Coast in Mali. And so Keita Dugu would have been typically a name in Northern Ivory Coast or in Mali. Now it's a village in Kru land, in Western Ivory Coast. And the problem with the place name resides in their connotation. They mean what they mean, but the connotation is what is not acceptable. They denote foreign culture in the Western regions of the Ivory Coast. They denote foreign occupation in those regions. They denote invasion. And for the local people, having a village of that name on what they consider their land, because the different ethnic groups consider those Western regions as their land, their ancestral lands. So creating a village with such a name there, in their mind, represent a kind of loss of identity and ancestral territory. Now, at the national level, the problem has administrative dimension, social dimension, political, cultural, and sometimes it's even related to land tenure issues. So yeah, at the national level, normally, as long as the villages are small villages, there's no problem. The problem starts when the government in the national policy of reorganization of territories, of administrative territories, have to promote some villages to the status of commune or to the status of sub-prefecture. That is making them like a central town around which you have different villages. There are national rules that they use for that. typically they use the demographics. What's the population of the village? Typically around 2,000 population, they will promote that village to the status of commune or sous-prefecture. And geographic location, it's like in a certain area, you look at all the villages, then you take into account which one has a central population, and then you establish the different boundaries. Now, when you apply the rules, because of the demographic advantage of the large population moved from Central Ivory Coast, Eastern Ivory Coast, or Northern Ivory Coast to Krumen on the western side, it's like those villages with non-native names would be the one being promoted to the status of commune and the sous-prefecture. As a result, it's like the native Kru villages will be under the kind of administrative authority of those non-native villages, which is not acceptable locally. Now, the problem has a very political, many times the government tries that and the local population resists it, and they have to go back and select maybe a very small local village as the administrative center, while in terms of service and maybe geographic location, that's not the one that should be promoted if we want to apply the national criteria. And the problem also has a political dimension. It relates to political power. It's like in a specific region, the political leaders who needs the votes to be elected. Where, on which side will there be? If you side with the local population, then they don't have the numbers when election time comes. Now, if you side with the non-native population, then maybe you get the vote, but the local population don't want you, they don't like you. So whatever choice you make, you have some problem. It becomes difficult to resolve it. At the national level, the government wants to promote national integration, national sentiment, not local cultural sentiment. But that is in contradiction, and that is in conflict with the local situation. And as I said, because of the electoral dimension, so far, it is very difficult to resolve. So I was surprised myself when I saw these things. And as I studied onomastics and I saw that on the ground, and I realized that, and I became aware of that when I joined the American Name Society, and I've started looking back home at some conflict that at that time I saw, but I could not understand and explain scientifically. But the American Name Society, my participation in this society has allowed me to take a scientific look at this situation. So the place names are part of the wider context of ethnic, social, cultural, and economic conflict in the Western region. Because of all the population that moved in, there's land conflict. There's economic interests conflicting with one another, and there are political interests. So the demographics, economic, and political interests make the whole situation very difficult to resolve, because whatever decision you make, it has electoral implication. It may make you lose a seat. It may make you gain a seat, but it's a very difficult situation. But I think the problem will be resolved not by the current generations, but by the future generations. Because what I observed on the ground is that the younger generations are less attached to the local cultures, to the local languages. So as they lose the culture, the future generation will see themselves more as citizens of the country rather than citizens of the different ethnic groups. And one thing that makes me think about that is that in those Western regions, just like anywhere else, if the name of a town is a French name, it's not a problem for anybody, because the country has been conquered by the French, and everybody has accepted the position of dominance of the French language. But in the same region, if a name is in another language from another part of the country, it is a problem. So if you call a village Didierville in Western Ivory Coast, or Laurentville is okay because it's French and the country has accepted French domination. But if you call a village name in the dialect of another region, it's a problem. So in the future, as the local population lose the culture, I think the problem will have less of an importance. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was so interesting. These three presentations we've just seen have so much in common when it comes to these decisions about the names. So given all that you've said so far, I want to know, how do they decide what name goes on the map?
Okay.
It seems very complicated.
What I've said, okay, in the region, I remember that some 20 years ago, to promote kind of national integration, a village named Koudougou was promoted to the status of commune. And around that, Koudougou is a name from Burkina Faso. And that village was largely inhabited by people from that area. But promoting that to the rank of commune, then you have under Koudougou a lot of population and villages of the local, the native people. They opposed that, they rejected it, and it became a national debate, and the government had to change the policy. So at this time, only the local names prevail.
Yeah. So if a name needs to be changed, is it hard? Is it difficult to change names of towns or streets or places?
The problem is not about changing the name. If a commune has been named, the policy is that the local people want all the names of commune and sous-prefecture to be in their dialect, regardless of whether the village is smaller than the other villages around. So ultimately, over time, these names will remain. You look at the map, all the names are local, native. But for those of us who know the ground, we see that when you go on the ground, it does make sense. In many cases, it does make sense, because a non-native village has maybe 5,000 people, and the native village that consider themselves owner of the land have 1,000 people. Where do you set the administrative center? You cannot set it in the big village because the local people will oppose it, but you set it in the small village of 1,000 or 500, then ultimately you want the people to go to administrative centers for government services. It does make sense. Yeah, but because of the cultural dimension and the political dimension, at this point, the native names prevail. So you look on the map, the list of commune and sous-prefecture is the native names. But when you look at for those of us who know the ground, and you look at the demographic, the non-native names are typically larger villages, bigger villages, more populated.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions from our other attendees?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, my video is very bad, so I may not be able to turn on the video.
That's okay.
I rather find this as a comment. It's very exciting, and I can relate directly to it with the situation in northern Ghana. So we have a community, for instance, at the moment where there is conflict and it all settles or boils around the name. So the name of the town belongs, or one group claims the name comes from their language, whilst those who also believe the land belongs to them think, no, we have to change the name to sort of be what we identify with. So the issue of name on towns, cities, and villages, I really can relate to it. And this presentation has really been very exciting, and I think I'll give it a thumb up. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
in northern Ghana and northern Togo, you have the native population, but also you have large Hausa population that came from Niger more than 100 years ago. And they have established large villages, but the native people still consider them as non-owners of the land. Exactly. So they will resent that the government promotes their villages to the status of commune or sous-prefecture, because it's like in the mind of the native people, it's like giving their land to the foreigners.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. We have a question in the chat from Eva. There are about 78 languages in Ivory Coast. Are there some towns and villages that have names that reflect all languages, or just the main languages and also French?
you have villages that reflect all languages, because initially, before the French colonial experience, all villages have their own name in their own dialects. So there are villages that reflect all of that. Like the smallest dialects are somewhere around Abidjan, where you are probably less than 10,000 people, as opposed to the Bakwé having 5 million people. But if they have only 5 villages, those 5 villages are named in their language, because it was initially like that. Yeah. And Abidjan is inhabited by a minority group. Different neighborhoods of Abidjan have the names in their languages. The name Abidjan itself comes from the language.
Okay, great. Thank you. Other questions, other comments?
I find it to be an interesting contrast to policies in the United States. I serve on the Washington State Board of Names, and our guiding principle is choose the name that has dominant local usage for the official name that's recorded nationally. A contrast, I think, with Ivory Coast.
Thank you, Grant. All right, well, thank you once again for that great presentation. So interesting.